Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today, we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and this will be part two with Eric Sirkin and Denny Weinberg, who is going to help us understand what's going on in Israel. Last week, Eric, we got to learn a little bit about your background and how you and Denny were, boyhood friends, and obviously you've kept in contact now as adults. And Denny, I know, has been talking to you in the past several months about what's really going on that we've been hearing, and it's been a privilege now to have you join us. You live in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, was heavily involved with receiving a PhD in the United States, and then into technology with all the beginnings of all the computer stuff, the personal computer stuff, as well as Apple, and then internet. So you're well versed in that. Last time you talked about how the news on the world stage is really controlled by the Palestinians, and they do it by fear and force. So that's what we're hearing. So one of the questions for you is, how does the average Israeli living in Israel get news, and then how does the government and the military get all of this intelligence? Because you gave a story last time of they'll actually find out specific houses that have arms, and they'll go take it through this intelligence. We'd like to know a little bit about how that all works. So maybe the first question is, how does the average person in Israel receive their news, and is it any different than what we hear because of the fact that Hamas controls it all?
Okay, so the news. So Israelis are pretty avid consumers of news, and with the internet, they have access to everything. So sometimes, not all, obviously they watch the local, the Israeli news in Hebrew, and of course they read the Israeli newspapers. The newspaper industry in Israel is quite active. The internet really harmed the newspaper industry most of the world. In Israel, it got harmed a bit, but it's still pretty strong because on the Jewish Sabbath, everyone still, not everyone, but most people still read the printed material. They can't go on the internet. They can't look at their phones. So they sit at home and they read the newspaper, among other things.
Interesting.
So therefore, that Friday afternoon edition, sells for quite a bit of money, and everyone buys it. So there's still a profitable newspaper industry in the country. So people read the newspapers, obviously, and the newspapers take often political views. There's one called Haaretz, which is quite well known in the country. It's considered a high-level newspaper, but most people here would consider it very far to the left, a very left-wing newspaper. I would say that it represents a very, very small fraction of the population in most of its views, but people like to subscribe to it because of all the other things outside of the news, magazine section, the entertainment section, what's going on, playing at the symphony, so on and so forth, culture. There's one that's called Makor Rishon, which kind of means the first center, if you will, the first. And it's a sort of written at a higher level Hebrew. Sometimes I have trouble reading, by the way, because my Hebrew is not like an Israeli. And it represents more of the right wing type of view on things. And then there are all kinds of things in the middle. And the same thing is true on the TV broadcast. They're basically four independent. They were TV stations in the country, and there's some that are more known for being to the left or to the right. And to the left or the right in Israel today means, where do you stand on how to deal with the situation with our neighbors? It's nothing to do with the economy or socialism, or those wars in Israel are over. Unlike the United States, where left, right, issues a lot of different issues, a lot of different stratifications of issues in the United States. Here, it's all, what are we going to do with our borders? What are we going to do with these Arabs in our territory and so on? I think thanks to Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he was the finance minister many years ago, liberalized the economy. And as a consequence, the economy grew very substantially. Everyone sees that. So the number of people who believe that socialism is the way to go in this country is very, very diminished. But having said that, okay, and maybe I'm getting off subject, so you'll stop me if I get too far off subject. But in this country, we have socialized medicine, and it works very well. I get probably, except unless I have some kind of rare disease or really unusual injury, I probably get there's just as good medical care here as I would in the United States. And I was going to Stanford University's Palo Alto Medical Foundation when I was living in Palo Alto. So I think this means a lot. So, it's not the time or place to be going into how the medical health system is organized in Israel, but no one here, I know, and I'm sure there are a few voices otherwise, even on the kibbutzim, well known for their, socialism and communism, it's contained within the social fabric of this small community. It is not generalized to the general community, which is, but there's a large social infrastructure. So there is an aid infrastructure for people under a certain poverty level. There are a lot of, my wife spends a lot of her waking time working within the Ministry of Education. It's not a full-time job, but she helps there with people with special needs, kids that need special schooling. And there's a very liberal infrastructure in this country to help kids with special needs. So I don't want to go into everything, but just to give you a flavor of, that yes, we are a capitalist economy, but we do have an underlying infrastructure which helps people who are truly in need. So therefore, the arguments left and right are always based upon, what do we do? Do we negotiate? Do we want 2 states, no states? What do we want? And that's where all the arguing and disagreements take place. And I would have to say that since the second Intifada in the country, more and more of the people have veered to the right. Okay, it's only today they've taken polls, and 65 to 70% of the population doesn't even want to hear the term 2 states, and the other 25% don't know. And maybe 5% are still thinking about what a 2-state solution would look like. So it doesn't mean that the world's going to listen to us and agree with us, because it's not the case, but that's just the view here. So that's how Israelis get their news. And if you get 2 Israelis in a room arguing, there'll be 4 opinions. And it's people here, unlike the United States, which is something else I would say, when I go to the United States and I go visit my family, I can't talk politics, whether it's U.S. or Israeli, because there are differences of opinion, and it just becomes arguing. Here, I'm generalizing because I'm sure it's not always true. 2 Israelis can argue on opposite sides of the polls on what should be done politically here in this country, and then they'll toast to a beer together or coffee. They'll walk away friends. There's not. You can argue in this country, and arguing is a national pastime, and complaining and complaining is a national pastime. Everybody here complains about everything, but it's just a way of dealing with the situation, and it's a national character of the population, I think. But so that's how the people get the news, and that's how people argue. And there's a whole range of opinions in this country, and you hear them all.
Yeah. What as you think of those different sources, would you say that it's fairly accurate information that's being presented by all these different newspapers and information, or are they getting also a slanted view?
No, I don't think that we get a slanted view. But let me give you an example, okay? As we all recall, back in April, Iran sent over 300 plus missiles and drones to attack Israel.
Yep.
And through a coalition help organized by the United States, the forces ended up knocking down all but like 2 or 3. And those 2 or 3 did in fact hit inside of a military base inside of Israel. And soon after, the IDF posted pictures of what they claimed the damage was. But many of us aren't sure that that's the only damage that really happened. So we don't know. I'm sure there are people in the country that do know, but the general population doesn't know what really happened. And many of us look at that with skepticism, saying there was probably more damage than they would like to show.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, other than like military things, there are one of the major peeves of Prime Minister Netanyahu is that there are very few secrets in this government because people just leak things all the time to the press. And it's difficult to govern for that reason, among other reasons. And so we hear a lot of leaks coming out of what's going on in the government constantly. And most of them are end up being close to being accurate.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing the news, and because people here watch a lot of the stations across the world. Bear in mind, we have immigrants here from everywhere. We have immigrants here from Russia, and they're watching TASS, the Russian news agency, and they're watching, and the French are watching, the French publications, and the British immigrants here are watching BBC and whatever. So there's a real broad range of what people are reading from the Western press, including Russia.
Yep.
Erica, when you were describing the sort of the one dimension of left versus right, or the place of real political discourse, how has the hostage issue affected that? And especially, it's probably not the first time there have been hostages that have been taken, but this long period with so many hostages, has that added either just a new flavor of the same thing, or has that changed this question of left versus right?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's not such an easy one to answer. So I have to go into a little bit of politics here, and so you have to bear with me. Prime Minister Netanyahu has served in this role and served in government for many, many years here. There's no term limits here in Israel. There are people talking about instituting law to institute such term limits, like in the United States. But what's interesting is we have the converse. Our Supreme Court justices must retire at a certain age. But our government officials, the prime minister, whatever, there are no term limits. It's kind of the converse of the United States. So in any case, and so when you're in office for so long, among other things, you accumulate a lot of people who don't like you. For whatever reason, you've screwed some politician in this government or done something to somebody else in that government. And as a consequence, he's built up a lot of enemies, I would say, within the political structure of the country. Okay? And so he ended up forming a government this time with people whose interests he could help serve. And it is the most right-wing government this country has ever seen. And there are a lot of people in this country who are very, very upset by that. Okay? Of course, there's a population that's thrilled by it. But I would say there's a large population. You saw it during the judicial reform demonstrations. And now you're seeing it in different forms. In the beginning, soon after October 7th, maybe 3 weeks to a month after, when demonstrations started appearing from what are called the families of the hostages, they were demonstrating because this is what they were told they should do in order to see their loved ones again. They hired a consultant. Collectively, they hired this guy who years ago helped in the negotiations and release of one soldier in 2011 that was traded by a government run by Prime Minister Netanyahu in exchange for over 1,000 prisoners being held in Israeli jails, including Yahya Sinwar, who was one of those. So he helped advise the family of that soldier, and then was hired by the hostage families who advised them they have to be in the streets basically every day. In order to see their loved ones again, they have to be out there demonstrating every day. And in my apartment in Tel Aviv, I'm actually only like a block and a half away from where all the action is, including where the families of the hostages camp out. And they demonstrate in front of what's called a building called the Kiryah, which in Israel is the equivalent of the Pentagon. It doesn't look at anything at all like the Pentagon, but it is where, you know, a lot of the military decisions and discussions and so on happen. So they stay nearby so they can demonstrate in front of the Kiryah. They block traffic. And over the months since they started these demonstrations, with time, there was a small contingent that's been growing of people who just basically hate this government. And they want to see it fall and form a different kind of a government, okay? For all kinds of reasons. Either they hate Netanyahu, or they hate the right wing, or whatever, okay? And over time, I would say, I think this is my view, and I think would be shared by most Israelis, that those two protests have sort of merged into one. And now, because of this distrust of Netanyahu, and I'm not going to take a position whether it's warranted or not. Hopefully I can avoid that. But there are a large number of people who don't trust him. When they say don't trust him, meaning in the negotiations for the hostages. Okay? Some of these families believe that the government's responsibility is to recover these people no matter what. It's like a bond between the government and its population, okay? And they feel that it's absolutely essential that the government recover the hostages at whatever cost. And when you talk with them one-on-one, you say, well, that might mean that we leave Hamas in charge. And they say, well, we'll deal with that later. They don't have an intelligent response when you raise these questions, because they're so emotionally wrapped up.
Sure.
And when you see their loved ones back, that they don't even want to think about all the other issues. But to be fair to the government, and don't get me wrong, I have a lot of things to complain about with this government. But to be fair to them, it's their responsibility, in my opinion, to balance the needs of the families to get their loved ones back in these hostages. And, well, gee, do I send in a contingent of soldiers to go rescue them, knowing that a large number of those soldiers may not come back, and therefore I have to face their families, you know, in body bags? Or I have to face all those residents who live on the periphery of the Gaza Strip, knowing that Hamas is back in power and we launching rockets once again. I mean, so it's a way the obligation of the government to sort of deal with all these different needs and to structure a proper compromise, if you will, over that. And so I think that's a way to look at it. But, you know, again, most people here will say, boy, if it was my child in Gaza being held hostage, I'd be out in the streets demonstrating too.
Yeah.
So I understand these parents. But on the other hand, is it necessarily the best interest of the country to do what they're demanding of the government?
Yeah. Let me revisit and pull this together a little bit. How many hostages do you think are left? One. Two, how does the ADF get their intelligence? And then if they're so good at intelligence, do they know where the hostages are? So kind of pull those together.
Okay. So you'll have to help me.
How many hostages do you think are left?
So the official, what I know is what the officially is announced by the IDF. There are 111 people who are unaccounted for, meaning they couldn't find their bodies, or in most cases, parts of their bodies in the area that are under attack. In fact, just 2 days ago, using DNA of a blood sample, they were able to identify a woman who was still missing. The last person who was missing, who they weren't sure was a hostage or not, and they declared her dead because they were able to DNA identify her. It's taken 9 months for that to happen. So, because there were just body parts strewn all over the place. So, coming back to the question, they now believe there are officially 111 people in various states in Gaza. They're pretty sure, highly confident, I would say, about 45 of them are dead. Okay, there may be more, but they're pretty confident, 90% plus, that at least 45 of them are really dead, leaving about 55 to 65 that are probably alive or in some form, or maybe dead, they don't know. Okay? So that's what they believe. Do they know where they are? I don't know, but knowing the army here, they probably know. Okay, I think they also know where Sinwar is. Okay, and in fact, it was reported in the Israeli press that about 2 weeks ago, there were troops that were in Khan Yunis that saw him in the tunnel, couldn't react fast enough to take him out. Okay, so there'll be a day when the IDF is going to announce that they took out Sinwar. And I don't know if it's going to be next week or next month or 2 months from now. That day will come. And I believe the army does know where he is, but they can't get to him for a variety of reasons. Okay, they kind of knew where Mohammed Def was, but they couldn't get to him until he came above ground and met with his chief lieutenant, and they took them both out. And in fact, they were watching his chief lieutenant, Salome was his last name, I forget his first name, for weeks before they killed them both. And they were waiting because the order was, don't take them out till we can get Mohammed Def also. That's what they did. So they know a lot of these things. So how do they gather the intelligence? It's through basically every prisoner that they arrest. I don't know how many, it's not said publicly, but I'm guessing they have 2,000 or 3,000 Hamas combatants in prison right now from this current conflict. Okay? And they question each and every one of them. And some are much more open. I do not know what coercion techniques they use. It's possible that there's torture involved. I honestly don't know. I don't believe it's necessary because these people, they talk. They like to talk. Sometimes they use threats, like, we know where your family is, and if you're not square with us, you can do things to your family. So there are things they can do that don't involve physical violence. It's possible that at times they use physical violence. I don't know. There's a case that, if we have time, I can describe this. There are several cases being investigated by the Army of issues coming up of violence against prisoners that are maybe worth talking about. But let me continue on with this line of questioning. So this is how they get their intelligence, and they coalesce all this stuff. They have intelligence units in the Army that are monitoring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in English, Arabic, and Farsi, Persian. All the TV stations, radios, internet, TikTok posts, everything, and they glean a lot of intelligence this way. The daughter of my wife served in one of these units because her English is so good. She was doing this for a while, and so they get a lot of intelligence this way also. They are actively, the IDF has ways of tapping into cell phone lines whenever they want. And so they're listening in on a lot of conversations, and a lot of, like Hamas hasn't been using cell phones for a long time because of this. They know that they're monitoring them. But, in the West Bank, they are using cell phones. They listen in a lot of what's going on. And they have intelligence, and they have AI systems that are constantly monitoring this and can identify keywords and phrases and raise them to people's attention. They have all this kinds of stuff going on. So did I answer your question?
Yes. Yep. That's very good. It's very helpful. Thank you again for sharing all this very important information as our understanding to how it all works. And thank you so much for that. We want to have you back again for what we call part 3 and get into, again, West Bank, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. There's certain things that are happening that we know are happening, but we'd like to know your perspective on it, what the information is. So, Eric, thank you so much. And Denny, appreciate, just your connection and your ability to keep bringing us the truth. We so appreciate it. We want to go to part 3, have you back. And every one of our audience is riveted with, this is how it works. And that helps us then understand, what you're going to tell us next. So thank you so much. And Kathy, we will continue next time.
Sounds great. If you have questions from today's broadcast, send them in to us at questions@abideministries.com, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.